With the help of Hashem, we are learning Masechtas Rosh Hashana, Daf Gimel. We left off already 13 lines from the top of the Amid. Quickly recapping, the Mishnah and the Masechta began with Arba Rosh Hashanah Heim, and the first one of the four is that Be'echad B'Nisan, meaning in the first day of Nisan. That's the Rosh Hashanah, and the first din the Mishnah mentioned is L'Melachim for kings. The Gemara explained that no matter what date on the calendar did a king assume his position, his reign, when it comes to the first day of Nisan, when we wrote documents and we would write the year based on this and this year to the reign of that king, the change of the year would be uniformly on the first day of Nisan. How do we know that? So we began with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan quotes a pasuk from Malachim. That pasuk is speaking about the reign of Shlomo HaMelech. Speaking about that in the fourth year of the reign of Shlomo HaMelech, he began to build the first Beis HaMikdash. That same pasuk also records that that was in the 480th year since we left Mitzrayim. And there's no need for that pasuk to write both of those reference points. One would have sufficed, and we learn from there that we're makish. We are comparing that just like when it comes to Yitzias Mitzrayim. When we are recording, how many years are we now from Yitzias Mitzrayim? So Be'echad B'Nisan. Nisan is the month where we go through the change of year from the Exodus. And the Torah speaks about the reign of Shlomo HaMelech. So from there we learn that just like Yitzias Mitzrayim is counted from Nisan, any king, no matter any Jewish king, as we'll see today, but let's begin with Melachim. When a king assumes his position of kingship, the year is going to be counted no matter what day did this king become king, Be'echad B'Nisan. Fine, hekesh. How do you know that Yitzias Mitzrayim is counted from Nisan? That was the Gemara's question. I know that de facto we left Mitzrayim on the 15th of Nisan, but maybe when we go through Tishrei, we entered the second year since the Exodus. That was the kasha. And the answer for that is that we quoted the passing of Aaron, which was on Rosh Chodesh Menachem Av. And the Torah says that that was in the 40th year since we left the Exodus. Since Yitzias Mitzrayim. The Torah, as we proved later in Shvat after Menachem Av, when the Torah begins to record the final address of Moshe Rabbeinu, we say that that happened also in the 40th year, even though the Torah doesn't write from Yitzias Mitzrayim, but we're going to learn today that of Papa, that even though the Torah doesn't write it, it means from Yitzias Mitzrayim. So if you are standing in Shvat, you're in the 40th year. I'm sorry, Menachem Av. And then when you go to Shvat, you are still in the 40th year. That rules out Tishrei cannot be the turn of the marking of the Exodus, because we went through a Tishrei and we're still in the 40th year. That's where we left off, and as we already spoke out yesterday, that only excluded all of the months in between Av and Shvat, but maybe other months between Shvat and Menachem Av, whether it's going to be Adar, whether it's going to be Iyar, whether it's going to be Sivan, whether it's going to be Tammuz, maybe those months are going to be the Rosh Hashana L'Melachim. I mean, we don't, the Rosh Hashana from Yitzias Mitzrayim, and whatever the Rosh Hashana for Yitzias Mitzrayim, that will also apply to Melachim. And we're going to learn Rabbi Elazar, another Amoira, who brings another proof that a king's reign is counted from the month of Nisan. Now, that's going to be the conclusion of the sugya. We will learn today a lot of Yiddish history. But to appreciate the Jewish history, we have to speak about a little bit of the world history. So Bavel, who was the superpower under the leadership of Nebuchadnezzar, they tragically for us conquered Eretz Yisrael, and Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, they destroyed the first Beis HaMikdash. And we went into Galus to Bavel. During Galus Bavel, the Persians became the new superpower. The Persian king who conquered Bavel, now guys, this is important to remember, was a person called Daryavesh. But since later there was another Daryavesh, not to confuse one with the other, we call him Daryavesh Hamadai. Daryavesh from Media. He was the one that conquered Bavel, and from his time until Alexander the Great and the Greeks became the future superpower, the Persians were considered the dominant power of the region and perhaps of the entire world. Now, after Daryavesh Hamadai, the next king was a king by the name of Koresh. And we're going to call him Koresh the Persian. It was this first Koresh that he said, he gave an order that the Jewish people should go back to Eretz Yisrael. And he was the one that initiated the building of the second Beis HaMikdash. Shortly after Koresh, the Persian, began the building of the second Beis HaMikdash, the enemies of our people convinced Koresh to stop it, and he stopped the building. And the second Beis HaMikdash, which was just beginning, was paused, and that went on for a nice period of time. There was a big debate whether there was a king in between Koresh, the Persian, and Achashverosh. There's a question about that. But this pause in the building of the second temple continued for sure if there was a king in between throughout his kingship. It paused throughout the time that Achashverosh was the ruler over Persia, and as we read in the Megillah, and throughout over the entire world. And then after Achashverosh came another Daryavesh. But not to confuse this Daryavesh with Daryavesh Hamadai, we call him Daryavesh the Persian. Many opinions say that this Daryavesh was actually the son of Esther, son of Achashverosh. And we're going to speak about this a little bit more towards the end of the shiur. If that is the case, then just to know that this Daryavesh now will have a halacha of a Jew, but I'm going to use the word now, and we'll get back to that, God willing, at the end of the shiur. This Daryavesh the Persian, during the second year of his reign, we continued to build the second Beis HaMikdash. It was actually not done through his initiation, but when he found out about it, he allowed it to happen because he discovered that Koresh the Persian already allowed it to happen, and that began in the second year of reign, and in this third of Adar, in the 6th year of the reign of Daryavesh the Persian, the second Beis HaMikdash was completed, 3rd of Adar. That following the upcoming Chodesh Nisan, the 14th of Nisan, was the first time after 70 years that the Jewish people brought their Korban Pesach. A year and a half after the second Beis HaMikdash was completed, it was then that Ezra, with the few groups of Yidden that he gathered, finally arrived in Yerushalayim. And as it's recorded that Ezra arrived in Yerushalayim with this first group during the month of Av in the 7th year of the reign of Daryavesh the Persian. All of these details will be important to remember. One other final point. Just like there are certain names that don't refer to a specific person, but they refer to the position, like Paroi. Paroi was not the name of the king, but all of the kings that reigned Egypt are called Parois. From Alexander, especially later when they divided this kingdom into 3, when it came to Rome, Caesar is not a name of a person, it's a generic name. The name of the kings of Persia written in scripture is Artaxerxes. So remember that when you see Artaxerxes, it's not the name of that king, it's a generic name. All of these kings, beginning with Daryavesh Hamadai, going all the way through Daryavesh the Persian, they can also be called Artaxerxes. Okay, so that backdrop is important to appreciate the flow of what we will be learning today. Rab Chizda comes along and he says, after we finish with Rabbi Yechanan and Rab Chizda, that even though the Mishnah began, that Echad ben Nisan, Dr. Rubin, that the first day of Nisan is Rosh Hashana l'Malachim, that's only for Jewish kings. Non-Jewish kings, their reign is going to begin, their Rosh Hashana of their reign is always going to be Be'echad B'Tishrei. And as we concluded yesterday, shiur al pi Hasidus, the concept of nature or beyond nature, it fits that Jewish people, at least when we are connected to God through Torah and mitzvahs, Ein Mazal Yisrael, right? Makes sense that our kingship is connected to the power of Nisan, to miracles, to beyond nature. And the world, including the kings, righteous kings or not righteous kings of the nations of the world, their kingship is marked from Echad B'Tishrei. And we're going to have to prove that which Rab Chizda said, and we're going to learn some more history. That many years later in the reign of Daryavesh the Persian, Nehemiah was notified about how Yerushalayim was in dire straits, And again, how this king, this Daryavesh, allowed Nehemiah himself to raise funds and to go to Yerushalayim and to upgrade the Gashmias and the beauty of the city of Yerushalayim. And finally, at the end, what the Gemara will be Megala is Daryavesh, the Persian, was initially called Koresh. Not to be confused with Koresh the Persian who began the building of the second Beis HaMikdash, but we called him Koresh. Koresh also means kosher. Not only was he perhaps a Jew, but in the beginning, the fact that he was the one under his rule that the second Beis HaMikdash was completed. Not only that, but he actually sent a lot of money for the upkeep of the second Beis HaMikdash. The Yidden called him Koresh, but after a certain point, as we will see, he soured, shehechmitz, he became, he lowered his moral standards, and then we went back to calling him Daryavesh, right? Daryavesh the Persian, independent whether he was a halachic Jew or not. Okay, this is the history that we have to have clear to appreciate today. It's a very easy daf, it's more history, but let's again begin on 13 lines from the top of the Amid. Again, we just proved that from when do we count Exodus? It must be from Nisan, can be from Tishrei, because in between Av and Shvat, you go through a Tishrei, and we still remained in the 40th year. So again, the Gemara asks, the beginning of the line, Ve'ema, okay, maybe Rosh Hashana is Iyar, like we mentioned. You did not rule out, not Adar, not Iyar, not Sivan, not Tammuz. So the Gemara says, no, Lo Yisakal Daitach, Iyar it can be. Why is that? Because towards the end of Parshas Pikudei, mamash almost by the end, it says, Vayehi b'chodesh harishon. It was in the first month, and like we mentioned yesterday, when it comes to the counting of the months, we always begin with Nisan. Right? The Mishnah doesn't call it Rosh Hashana because it's not Rosh Hashana, it's Rosh Chodashim. But in the month of Nisan, B'Shana Hashenis, in the second year, Be'echad l'chodesh, Rosh Chodesh on the first day of the month, Hukama Mishkan, that was the Bayom Hashmini. As we know, the first day, the Mishkan was functioning under the direction of Aaron HaKohen. Unlike the prior 7 days that it was already functioning, but then Moshe Rabbeinu was like a Kohen Gadol, or actually a Kohen Gadol, and it says, now we're going to the portion of Baha Aloischa. The Torah records the first journey we made away from Sinai. When did that happen? Vahi b'shana hashenis. It was in the second year from Exodus. B'chodesh hasheni, in the second month. We call that Iyar. And on the 20th of the month, that was the first time that Na'aleh ha'anan me'ala mishkan ha'edus, that the anan went above. And that was the sign that it's time to journey onwards. In other words, if we were in Chodesh Nisan, and we say we're in the second year from Exodus, we go into Chodesh Iyar, we're still in the second year of Exodus. I know it's only 1 month ahead. It's 1 month and 20 days ahead. If the Rosh Hashana, to the count of the Exodus, would have been Rosh Chodesh Iyar, then the Torah would have said that we were now in the third year, not in the second year. And still, when we were in the month of Iyar, and still the Karel Shana Shniya is Mechlal, the Rosh Hashana is not Iyar. Simple. We ruled out Iyar. Now we have to rule out Sivan. We're going to go in the order. But Ve'ema Rosh Hashana is still Sivan, Rosh Hashana of the Exodus. And whatever the Rosh Hashana of Exodus will be, because of the hekesh, because of the comparison that Rabbi Yechanan brought from the verse in Malachim, the same will be the Rosh Hashana LeMalachim, the count of King Solomon, which will from that go to all the kings. No, the Gemara says it can't be Sivan. Because it says, and we're quoting a verse from the portion of Yisrael, it wasn't the third month. Let's say it's Bnei Yisrael Meretz Mitzrayim, from when the Jewish people left Egypt. Third month, the Torah is not giving a year because it was, it was in the first year. Hold on. If Sivan would be Rosh Hashanah to the count of the Exodus, then the Torah should have said it wasn't the third month. Now we are in the second year, let's say, from the Exodus. The fact that Torah does not say that is a proof that Sivan is not the Rosh Hashanah to the count of the Exodus. But still, what we still have left is, I even didn't mention of, we have Tammuz, maybe Rosh Chodesh Av. I know that Aaron passed away then, but maybe that's the Rosh Hashanah, and maybe other. There's still 3 months that we did not rule out. Now, the Gemara doesn't have an answer for that, because really, we can argue that we know that there are two heads of the Jewish year, Tishrei and Nisan, like we explained al Pi Kabbalah. We know there's the emesis, that there's an Oir Chodesh, there's some new empowering divine light that comes down to all of the worlds on the first day of Tishrei, and that is the light through which nature is going to be empowered with additional godliness. And then there is another Oir Chodesh that comes down in the month of Nisan. It's either or. No, it's really the moment we ruled out Tishrei to be the Rosh Hashana of the Exodus, logically it's either Tishrei or it's Nisan. And indeed, Rabbi Yechanan doesn't have an answer. But Rabbi Elazar wanted to have another source which will better prove that the Exodus, that the Exodus is, that Rosh Hashana l'Melachim, not to compare Melachim to the Exodus, but to prove that Rosh Hashana l'Melachim is Nisan. We're not using the Hekesh. We're going straight that no matter when a king becomes a king, comes Rosh Chodesh Nisan, that king entered the second year or the third year or the next year of his reign. So Amar Rabbi Elazar Mahachem. It says regarding Shlomo HaMelech, but this is not a pasuk in Malachim, but this is a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim. Vayochel livnois. Vayochel means he began. King Solomon began to build. Now we learned yesterday that he concluded in the fourth year. When did he begin? In the B'chodesh Hasheni, in the second month. Basheni, we don't know what this word Basheni means. In the second month, in the second. That will be the question mark. B'shnas Arba, in the fourth year of his reign. That's when he began. That's the same verse. He began to build the first Beis HaMikdash in the fourth year of his reign. Now asks the Gemara, what does this Basheni mean? My Sheni. Does it not mean that it was in the second month, and in the second month from where we count his reign? Gewaldik. In other words, Rosh Hashana for all Malachim, including Shlomo HaMelech, is Nisan. So Iyar is not only the second month, but it's the second year for uniquely connected to the Rosh Hashana l'Malachim. That's the Raya of Rabbi Elazar. Maskav Ravina, who said that? Maybe Sheni means Sheni B'chodesh. Maybe Sheni means the second day of the month. So the Gemara says no. Whenever Scripture is speaking about a day of the month, it writes the number B'chodesh. Sheni B'chodesh be'ed yahav ksiv. Never do you find anywhere in Scripture that they write in the second, and it means the second of the month, and the verse doesn't write month. But maybe it means Monday, Upa. Maybe Basheni means, punct over here, we're writing the day of the week. Answers the Gemara, answers the Gemara, two answers. Number one, we never find anywhere in Scripture that when we are referring to a certain date, that we should speak about the day of the week. It's interesting. You don't write that down. But you write down the day of the month, you write down the year. Punct over here, they're going to write on a Monday, doesn't make sense. V'oid, since the Torah is vague, we have to use the system of a hekesh, of making a comparison. Makish sheni basra l'sheni kama. Right, it says mamash one after the other. Since it says basheni, b'chodesh hasheni, basheni, so the first clarifies the second. Masheni kama, the Torah says b'chodesh hasheni, af sheni basra must mean chodesh. Okay, so we are circumventing, we don't need the hekesh to the Exodus. From this pasuk, the Torah is being megala, the Torah is revealing that Shlomo HaMelech didn't only begin building the Beis HaMikdash in the fourth year of his reign, in the second month for everyone, but also in the unique second month for the Rosh Hashana of Malach. And now what's going to be amazing is that we're going to have a braisa that's very brief. This braisa is going to go through all of the verses that Rabbi Yechanan brought, Tanya Kavasa de Rabbi Yechanan. But really, as we're going to learn the second to last Tosfos in a moment, this braisa is also going to bring the verse that Rabbi Elazar brought. And what the Gemara means to say is that you need to have both of them. And let's read it inside first. Look, it's mamish. We're going to make a review now. How do you know that the reign of kings, no matter what day did that king become king? Whenever you go through the month of Nisan, that king entered his second year, his third year, his next year, because it says, and he begins with the pasuk that Rabbi Yechanan brought. It says in Malachim, in the 480th year from when we left the Exodus. It says in the fourth year of the reign of King Solomon. And the Braisa itself knows that now you have to bring proofs that Yetzias Mitzrayim is always counted to Nisan and not to Tishrei. How does he know it? The mamash what we had yesterday, because it says Vayal Aaron HaKohen, the Aaron HaKohen went Elohei al Pi Hashem when the month of Av in the 5th month. 5th month is the 40th year. Then it says later that in Shvat later it was in the 40th year in the 11th month, which is Shvat. So if Shvat you're in the 40th, when you were in Av you were in the 40th. Cannot be any of the months in between. Again, the Baraisa is not even asking the question. Maybe the gathering, the assembly, the address of Moshe Rabbeinu began in Shvat before Av. That can't be, because the address was after Sichon died, the first wide line. And we know, Vayishma HaKnani, that the Knani heard about the passing of Aaron. In other words, he was alive when Aaron passed away. So therefore, again, Shvat has to be after Av. And how do you know Vayishma HaKnani is that Aaron passed away? Again, like we learned on top of the Amid, where it says Vayiru Kol Ha'eda, when everyone saw that Aaron passed away. And the homiletical, the drush is Vayeiro'u, that they became noticeable because the Anani Yaakov left. So in other words, he only attacked the Jewish people dafka after Aaron passed away. And so that proved that Shvat is after Av. Now the question is, maybe Rosh Hashana is any of the months in between Adar, beginning with Adar all the way to Av. So the Braisa began to rule it out, as we began to learning today. Can't be Iyar. Iyar is not the Rosh Hashana to the Exodus. Maybe it's Sivan. And now we end it. So we only ruled out Iyar and Sivan. What we did not rule out is not Tammuz, not Av, not Adar. So the Braisa got stuck. So now the Braisa quoted what Rabbi Elazar quoted. Since it says, Vayachel livnois, Shlomo HaMelech began to build. And again, V'goymer, and the word Basheni must mean the 2nd month of his reign. So the Braisa puts together Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Elazar. Now hold on, look inside the second to last Tosfos. So Tosfos clarifies that when the Gemara introduces this Braisa, and we say, this is a backup, this is a proof to Rabbi Yechanan, you can ask, it's just as much as a proof to Rabbi Elazar. Lav la'afuki de Rabbi Elazar. It's not that this is a proof to Rabbi Yechanan and not like Rabbi Elazar. The ha'maisin nami de Rabbi Elazar b'hach b'naisa. Eloma, what the Gemara wants to point out is that only having the verse of Rabbi Elazar is not enough. We are accepting that the word Sheni means the 2nd month of Rosh Hashana l'Malachim. But you know what? What month did Shlomo HaMelech himself assume the throne? Shlomo HaMelech assumed the throne in the month of Nisan. So if you only would have had this pasuk of Divrei Hayamim, yes, we are interpreting the verse correctly, but one would have said, of course, for King Solomon, when did the year change? When you hit Nisan. But maybe that was personal to Shlomo HaMelech because he became a king on the month of Nisan. Maybe other kings that will become, that they assume their office at other months of the year. Maybe it's a personal Rosh Hashana, like our birthdays. That's why the pasuk of Rabbi Elazar is not enough. So you really have to come to Rabbi Yechanan. It's Gavaldik. And you see that all of the verses of Rabbi Yechanan end with a question mark. How do you know that it's not Tammuz? And how do you know that it's not Av? And how do you know that it's not Adar? So that together with Rabbi Elazar brings a pour. That is how we have a raya. So it's really, we are combining both Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Elazar. Okay. End of the proof. And now that we established and we gave the source that Be'echad b'Nisan, on the first day of Nisan, you have the New Year's to the recording of the reign of a king, Amar Rab Chizda, right? We have 5 lines, 6 lines before the bottom of the Amid. 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Lo yishanu elo l'malchi Yisrael. This is only for Jewish kings. Be'echad b'Nisan is their Rosh Hashana. Aval l'malchi Yom Yisraelam. But when it comes to non-Jewish kings, they also have a Rosh Hashana. And when we wrote documents, right, Mipnei Shalom Malchus, we would also record, we are writing this document in the year, in such and such year of King so-and-so. We would write that. But how did we count a year of a non-Jewish ruler from the month of Tishrei? And how do we know this? So it says in Nehemiah, Divrei Nehemiah ben Chachlayom, Vayhi b'chodesh Kislev. It was, like we spoke at the end, that after we went through all of the Seder of the kings, the 4 kings that we mentioned, Right? We mentioned Daryavash Hamadai, we mentioned Koresh the Persian, we mentioned Achashverosh, and then Daryavesh the Persian. And as we said, Daryavesh the Persians, in the beginning was also, we called them, the Jewish people called him Koresh. So we said that the rebuilding of the second Beis HaMikdash, the rebuilding began in the second year. The second Beis HaMikdash was completed in the 6th year. As we're going to learn today on Amud Beis, on the 3rd day of the month of Adar of the 6th year of the reign of Daryavesh the Persian, many years later, under the same king, that's this verse, that it was in the 20th year of the reign of this Daryavesh, as we mentioned, that's where Nehemiah heard about, as we'll see, he heard about how Yerushalayim was still laid in ruin. So the temple was built, but the city was not the way it should be. And he got permission and funds from the same Daryavesh for him to go to Yerushalayim and for him to rebuild, to upgrade the status of the city. When did that happen? It happened in the 20th.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Is it a requirement in the Torah for a Jewish state to have a king in the first place?
It's a mitzvah for the Jewish people to appoint a king. At that time, Baruch, we were not a real independent nation. No, it's the superpower were the Persians. Without their permission and funds, we would be unable to build the temple. I'm sure that...
Just actually referring to now, since we have a Jewish state, we haven't appointed a king. Yet,
Baruch, we are about to do it. And if you're a candidate, put your hand in the box. You never know if you come from the tribe of Yehuda. Now, the Ksiv, and it says, the third to last line, so this happened in Kislev of the 20th year. There were 2 steps. There was, as we'll see soon, that Nehemiah heard about the dire straits, and then Nehemiah went and spoke to the king, and got reshus from the king. So he heard about the news in the month of Kislev. It was in the month of Nisan, Shnas Esrim. Guys, here's the word, La'ar Tachshasta. La'ar Tachshasta is this generic name. Here it's referring to Daryavesh the Persian, or what we called initially Koresh. So Mordechay Kislev, and it's in his 20th year. And then we are a few months later in Nisan, and it's still in the 20th year, if the count of the reign even of non-Jewish kings, and we're going to begin now that he's a non-Jewish king, if it changes in the month of Nisan, Michlal de Rosh Hashana lav Nisanu, because if it would have been Nisan, then we would have said we are in the 21st year of the reign of this Artach Shasta. And look inside the last Tosfos. We just mentioned this concept above. In other words, the Rosh Hashana cannot be anywhere between Kislev and Nisan. But still, look inside the last Tosfos. Afal Pishi yesh kama chadoshim bei Nisan leTishrei. Right? How do you know that it's Dafka Tishrei? Just like we began today's shiur. You only ruled out the months between Kislev and Nisan, but between Nisan and Kislev you have many months. I'm sorry, between Nisan and Tishrei. So Mikol Makayim, that's Tosfos. Hoyel da apikte min Nisan. That really goes to Rabbi Yechanan. It's either or, be'emes. Since we proved from over here that the count of the reign of non-Jewish kings is not going to be Nisan, then the next logical Rosh Hashana is going to be Oikmeya Tishrei. Okay, let's go back on the Gemara. Now, it says the Gemara, hold on, not so quick. Bishloima Heich, which is the second verse. The second verse writes clearly, it mefanish that it's in the 20th year of the rule de la Artach Shasta, of the king. Clear. But in the first pasuk, that Divrei Nechemia ben Chachlaya was in the month of Kislev in the 20th year. It doesn't say to what. Mimai de la Artach Shasta. How do you know that that's also counting from the reign of that king, which, as we know, like we mentioned, Daryavesh the Persian, Dilma Daf Gimel Amud Beis Leminyan Achnino. Maybe there was some other historical event. We don't know what it is. The Gemara is not even suggesting what it is. How do you know it's from the same reign? So that's the Rav Papa that we quoted yesterday. That's the rule in Scripture. When the Torah uses the same words, 20th year. Yesterday we learned about the 40th year. In the 40th year, in one verse it said the 40th year from the Exodus. In the other verse it said nothing. We have to make Gzeira Shava. Rav Papa from here, Shnas Esrim, Gzeira Shava. Just like Hassan means in the second verse, the Torah writes explicitly that Dila Artach Shasta, it's the 20th year of the reign of the king. Afach, it's also Dila Artach Shasta. Okay. And now again, we're going to have the same question we had today on Amud Aleph. So, if verse number 2 happened after verse number 1, verse number 1 is in the month of Kislev, 20th year. Second pasuk was 20th year in the month of Nisan. Then you're right. Then it can't be Rosh Chodesh Nisan. But maybe the Seder was reversed. Umimai de Maise Kislev Kadem, asks the Gemara, maybe the pasuk that's recording that which happened in Nisan, which was how Nehemiah spoke to the king, maybe that happened first. Maybe Rosh Hashana is Echad ben Nisan. By Echad ben Nisan you entered the 20th year. And many months later in Kislev you're still on the 20th year because you didn't go over another Nisan. So the Gemara says that by reading scripture, I wouldn't know. But we have a tradition, we know what, you have to push it, you have to look inside the Psukim Tanach. That which is recorded in Pasuk number 1 is the notification that Nehemiah had. And Loisal Kadaitach, because the Tanya we know that the Varim Sha'amar Chanani, verse number 1 is indeed speaking about that which Chanani told Nehemiah, and he told it to him in the month of Kislev. That's how we know that verse number 1 happened first, and it took Nehemiah from Kislev until Nisan to get the right opportunity to speak to the king. It took a little bit of time, but he succeeded. Sometimes you have to really, put your thoughts together. You have to have a strategy because you're talking to a king. It could have gone south also. Okay. Amra Nehemiah lemelech b'Nisan. So that, in other words, if you would not have this oral tradition, you could have made such an argument. We know that's not the case. And that's it. And that's the end of the raya. In other words, again, there's no raya that it's not in other months, but like Tosfos says, it's either Nisan or Tishrei. Chodesh Nisan is not the Rosh Hashana l'malchei yumas ha'olam. How do I know that? From Shnas Esrim. And now the Bryce is going to go through details about what Nehemiah heard, and how he presented it to the king with God's success, with God's bracha. Dvarim she'amar Chanani leNehemiah beKislev. That's the pasuk, like we just quoted, Shenemar, that Divrei Nehemiah ben Chachlaya. That's like the opening. These are the words of Nehemiah ben Chachlaya. That Vahi b'chodesh Kislev, it was in the month of Kislev. Shnas Esrim, in the 20th year of the rule of this Daryavish the Persian. And Va'ani and I Nehemiah, I was in the city of Shushan Habira. I was in the capital city. Vayavei Chanani. Now, who is Chanani? He's not mentioned. So that's Echad Ma'achai, is one of my brethren, a Yid. Who va'anashav Yehuda, and they came, him, with a group from Yehuda, and that goes not only from the general region of Yehuda, but that refers to Yerushalayim. And vo esholem al ha-Yehudim ha-Pleiton, I asked Chanani, what about how are the surviving Jews? Now, when he spoke about the surviving Jews, he was not speaking about the Jews that were back in Yerushalayim, but he wanted to know the state of the Jewish people that were in Bavel. And don't forget that Bavel now was a losing country. Bavel, already a few kings back, they lost the battle against the Persians. And that affected the Babylonians in general, and it specifically affected the Jewish people. How are the Yidden in Bavel? That's the Yehudim HaPleita. Asher Nish'arnu Men HaShevi, that are the ones that are still there. They are the descendants of the Jews, or some of them could have been older Jews that they themselves were taken captive by the Churban Bayis Rishon from Yehuda, from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. And I, Nehemiah, asked Hanani and his Chavedim, what's happening in Yerushalayim? He wanted to get a report. And Vayoimru li, this is what they told me, Nehemiah, that Hanesharim asher nish'arnu min hashevi sham b'medina, the Jewish people, the ones that are still living, right? The she'eres ha'pleita, the remnant of the Jewish people that are there in Bavel, I want you to know, bera'a gedola u'becherpa. They live in great misery, and they live in humiliation. And imagine, this is already many years after the second temple was built. And you're asking me what's happening in Yerushalayim. It's taka great that the temple is built, but the walls surrounding of Yerushalayim, they are broken, they are breached. Don't forget that then you needed to have a protected city. Even after the Beis HaMikdash was built, the dominant power then, the Persians, they didn't want for Israel to be built up strong. They didn't want for Yerushalayim to be a protected city because maybe they're going to rebel against Persia. So they dafka left the walls breached. You have to just appreciate that asking the king in Persia to build up the walls, that's a dangerous ask. He might understand that maybe the Jewish people are planning to rebel and become independent. Ushe'oreh and his gates are still nitzin subeich, they are still set on fire. Because when you went to Yerushalayim, many years, the second Beis HaMikdash was completed in the 6th year of the rule of this Daryavish. In the 20th year of his rule, the city did not look okay. Okay, so this is the report. He received that in Kislev. Now Nehemiah had access to the king. Nehemiah was one of the advisors of the king. He just was waiting for the right opportunity. So whatever he heard later, not before, Amra Nehemiah lemelech. When? In the month of Nisan, and that's the second pasuk that we quoted on Amud Aleph. Shenemer, as we just quoted, Vayihi b'chodesh Nisan, that it was in the month of Nisan. Still in the 20th year, le'ar tachshasta hamelech. That's the raya that Chodesh Nisan is not Rosh Hashana l'malchei umas ha'olam. So there was a setting. First of all, you want to make sure that it's a joyous setting. The king has to be in a good mood. And yayin lefanav. Actually, the truth is that Nehemiah wasn't only an advisor, but Nehemiah was also from the people that whenever wine was served to the king, perhaps other foods, the king was always afraid that they're trying to poison him. So he had people around him that would taste of the foods or the drinks first. Nehemiah was one of those people. Now, after Nehemiah heard about the terrible state of Yerushalayim, Nehemiah chose not to drink any wine. So now the yayin was lefanav, and vo'esas hayayin, and then, as was my position, that was the first time since Kislev until Nisan, he was there. He served the king the wine. And prior to this event, and nothing happened. That means Nehemiah was not in front of the king between Kislev and Nisan. But prior to Kislev, I was usually cheerful in the king's presence. Now I looked very worried. Not only the Marsha adds, not only did he look worried, he was broken by the non-positive report, he also didn't drink the wine. So the king saw he doesn't drink the wine, and he had a psaluk, he wasn't cheerful. The king thought that Nehemiah is trying to poison him. So the last narrow line, the king told me, Madua panecha roim. Why is your face downcast? And I know that you're not ill. Yeah, you're looking nervous, and Nachla Marsha adds, and you're not tasting the wine, and you're not ill. Ein ze ki'im ra lev. It must be that there is evil in your heart. The king suspected Nehemiah that Nehemiah was trying to poison him. And oy gewalt, how dangerous is that? And indeed, va'ira harbe ma'oid. Nehemiah writes, I became very afraid. Va'omer lamelech. So I right away responded, Hamelech lo'olam yichya. First of all, may the king live forever. I'm not trying to poison you. And then he says, Madua lo yero panai. How can my face not be downcast? How can I not be worried? Asher ho'ir beis kivras havoisai, the city which is the place of my ancestors' graves. Look at the wisdom of Nehemiah. In other words, he wanted to downplay Yerushalayim. He referred to Yerushalayim as, a cemetery. So the king should not be afraid to build it up. He says the city that's where my ancestors are buried. No one is buried in Yerushalayim other than David HaMelech, but it's all Zayin. Chareva, it's completely in ruin. And its gates, as we says, are consumed in fire. Now, don't forget, this king, not only did he allow for the second Beis HaMikdash to be completed, but for years he's giving money for the maintenance of the Beis HaMikdash, and it was no small matter. What the king didn't realize is that there's the Beis HaMikdash, that's the Ikir, but then there's the rest of the city. He thought that he's being good for the Jewish people. Now he's hearing for the first time that Yerushalayim is terrible, is a disaster. So the Melech, when he heard that, he told me, what exactly do you want? Was willst du? Now comes the sale. Now comes the ask. So the first thing Nehemiah did is in his heart, he asked God that he should get the right words. So v'espalel el Elokei Hashamayim. I davened to the Oibishter. And v'omer lamelech, and then I told the king, the human king, im ala melech toiv. If it's, the king will find what I'm asking good. Ve'im yitav avdecha lefnecha, and if I will find goodness in your eyes. What I'm asking is, asher tishlocheni el Yehuda. Please send me to Yehuda. Where? Again, it doesn't say Yerushalayim. El ir kivras avoisai. Place to the place where my ancestors are buried. And ve'evnen, and let me rebuild it. And rebuild it with your funds. Don't forget, they were the dominant power. Build it with federal money. Oh, so Vayomer li HaMelech, so the king responded to me, Nehemiah, and this detail, guys, we're going to continue Sunday morning. This very important historical Gemara is Vahashegol. Now, just to know, the word shegol normally means a consort, a consort. Oh, consort. I want to make a correction. Yesterday it was not fowl, it was fowl. Fowl, because fowl is a bird. Fowl is an animal. Shegol is as a concubine. Shegol normally means not the real queen. But as we'll see, this shegol can refer to a dog, to a female dog, that this Daryavesh sat at, there was the king, and then there's this little throne by his side, normally the queen. At that time, Daryavesh decided to marry his female dog, and she was the queen. We'll learn more about that, Hamertz Hashem and Daf Dalet. So the king told me, while the shegol was sitting at Sloi, he wanted to know more information. You want to go to Yerushalayim. Ad masa yeh mahalachacha. When will you depart? What's your plan? And I want you to back here. Umasai tashuv. When will you return? And I made a plan, and the bottom line is, Vayitav lifnei hamelech, the king found favor to my ask, and I was matzliach. And Vayishlacheni ve'eton leizman. The king sent me, I made a commitment to come back, and he didn't just go there, he went there with the checkbook of Uncle Sam, or of Uncle Daryavesh, or however they called it then, and all of this brais is just to prove that the pasuk of Nisan happened after the pasuk of Kislev. You can ask Pshita. Of course, he told the king what he heard from Hanani. It's not so Pshita. Don't forget that these are Nevi'im, and sometimes they knew information from God directly. He could have told the king something even before he heard it from Hanani. That's why we need to have a oral tradition of the Seder of the Psukim. Okay, and so that's Rab Chizda halt. The Mishnah says, Be'echad b'nisan Rosh Hashana l'malachim. Whoop, that's only Malchei Yisrael, not Malchei Yumas Ha'olam. Now we're going to have a Bamba Kasha. Mosav Rabbi Yosef. No, can't be. Why not? It says, Be'yoim esrim va'arba lachodesh bashishim. Right, this is back. We're going back to the beginning of the rule of Daryavesh the Persian. And as we mentioned, it was in his second year of his reign that they re-began to build the second base and make sure they continued where the first left off. When did it happen? It happened on the 24th day of the 6th month. The 6th month is Elul. Bishna Shtayim, to the second year of Daryavesh the Persian. And it says that Bashvi, on the 7th month is Tishrei, Be'esrim ve'echad lachodesh, on the 21st of the day, another step happened. Now, if you're standing in the month of Elul and you are in a second year, you're standing in the month of Tishrei and you are still in a second year. If Rosh Hashana from Malchei Yumas Ha'olam is Tishrei, then the 7th month should be now the 3rd year. Ve'emisa Bashvi should have been Bishnas Gimel Nibayalei. You see that you were before Tishrei Elul, you went into Tishrei, and you are still in the 2nd year. Now this was not in the 20th year of his reign, this is in the beginning. So Amar Rabba Bohu, that's the answer. Kuresh is the same one. Kuresh is Daryavesh the Persian, who was now called Kuresh. And don't forget, it was the real Kuresh that began the building of the second temple. So we give him credit. Kuresh melech kasher haya. And therefore, lefikach manu loy kamalchei Yisrael. Not only was he a melech kasher, but at that time the Yidden chose to consider him Jewish and to count like we count for Jewish kings. Now, like we mentioned in the introduction, that this Daryavesh, the Persian, according to most, was the son of Esther. And really the bigger question is, what do you mean he was Melech Kasher? Kim Malchei Yisrael. Why didn't he have the status of a Melech Yisrael? I understand that he wasn't an Eretz Yisrael, but here's something very important. The development of the oral Torah, and this whole concept that once the Sanhedrin gave a ruling, the next generation is bound by the rulings of the prior generation unless they reconvene and they have to have another sitting of the Sanhedrin and another vote. That was something that only happened during the times of the second Beis HaMikdash. Prior to that, I want you to know that the oral Torah, and as we will learn in Yevamos, and in other places. Today the halacha is, if the mother is Jewish, even if the father is, God forbid, not Jewish, the child is a halachic Jew. That is a machloikas. We're going to learn this in Yavamis. We're going to learn a shita, maybe the child is considered the Jewish mamzer. We're going to learn an opinion that says that if both parents are not Jewish, the child is not Jewish. Child has to convert. We have all these opinions, not la halacha. Then we didn't have a firm halacha. And there was a question about that. So just to know, when we're going to learn in our Gemara, it sounds that we don't really consider him Jewish. Take, both of his parents were not Jewish. Elama, since he behaved amazing, not only did he have a high moral behavior, but on top of that, he was the one that under his kingship, the Beis Hamikdash was we continued and we completed it. So we considered him, we counted for him to give him kavod as Kamalcha Yisrael. Tanach, we called him Kudesh up until a certain point. Maskav Rabbi Yosef. Yes.
A quick question. When it says the 7th month, does it mean we have to assume that it's talking about Tishrei?
Yes, for sure.
The 7th month
for sure
could be, meaning if the non-Jewish kings counted from Tishrei, why wouldn't they say that?
Because everywhere in Scripture, whenever we give a number to the months, it's always going to go back to the way it's written in the Torah that month number 1 is Nisan. Always. Okay. So Maskiv Rabbi Yosef, I have 2 questions on you. Number 1, if that's the case, that this Daryavesh the Persian, who we are now calling Kudesh, that will make him the second Kudesh, if we count for him from Nisan, I will have a contradiction. The Imkain Kosher Krayadodi. What will be the contradiction? So here we go. Now we're jumping from the 2nd year of his reign to the 6th year of his reign. Like we mentioned in the introduction, it took that many years to finally complete the building of the second Beis Hamikdash. It says, Vishetzi. Vishetzi means completed. Vishetzi by Sodona. This house, which is the second temple, was completed. When? Ad Yom Telas Aliyah Chadar. This is real Aramaic. On the 3rd day, right? The 3rd day of the month of Adar. From what year? Dihi Shnas Shit Lemalchus Daryavesh Malka. On the 6th year. So guys, Adar, the 6th year. So say it by heart. Ezra went 18 months later. Not he went. He arrived 18 months later in the month of Elul with the group in Yerushalayim. Now, if Nisan is Rosh Hashana L'Melachim, then during those 18 months, you had 2 Nisans. Right? Because we finished it in Adar. 18 months later. It means 1 month later, you have a Nisan. Then another Nisan, right? 18 months later. So it says that Vayavoy, V'tayin, it says, around a year later, that's when Ezra departed from Bavel. That's when he departed from Bavel. But when did he arrive? When did Ezra and the first group of Yidden arrive in Yerushalayim? It's quite amazing that the Yidden, Ezra, arrived 18 months after the second temple is already functioning. In the 5th month, that's of. And what year is it from the reign of Daryavesh? Shnas Hashvis Lemelech. That's a kasha. If, because of Kudesh or Daryavesh the Persian being a Melech Kasher, we called him Kudesh, we counted for him unique Rosh Hashana L'Chodesh Nisan, 2 Nisans passed since they completed it until Ezra arrived there. And if that's the case, it should not be the 7th year of the king. The Im Isa, that Nisan for him is the Rosh Hashana, Shnas Hashminis Mi Boyele. That's a problem. Number 1. Number 2, the Oid Midami. Why are you confusing Kudesh and Daryavesh? This is a big question because don't forget that Kudesh was the one that began building the second Beis Hamikdash. You're confusing. We have a Kudesh. Kudesh was the king that took the throne after Daryavesh, the Madai, conquered Bavel. There was another Kudesh. So we learned it answers the Gemara. Tana, no. Aside of that Kudesh, who Kudesh, who Daryavesh, and who Artaxshasta. Kudesh was, we called him Kudesh because for a long while he was a kosher king. That sometimes the Torah refers to, like we learned today, the 20th year of the reign of Artaxshasta. Yeah, Artaxshasta is a generic name. Al-Shem Malchusei. All of the kings of Persia were called Artaxshastas, like Paroi, like Caesar, like Mr. President here in America. What was his actual name? Like we said, his name was Daryavesh. But the problem is, Mikol Makayim, if he finished building it in the 6th year in Adar, 18 months later, when did Ezra arrive? B'chodesh HaChamishi of, in the 7th year. No, it should have been in the 8th year. That kasha remains. So answers the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak loy kasha. In the 2nd year of his reign, earlier on in his reign, since Koidam Shehechmetz, before he soured, which means, when wine turns into vinegar, the souring of the wine indicates that there was a deterioration. There was a lowering of quality. Before he lowered his quality, Taka, even though we never then considered him a bona fide Jew, but since he was behaving very high, on a high standard of morality, together with the fact that he was the one who allowed for the second Beis HaMikdash's building to be completed with his funds, and then, as we will see, he actually paid for its maintenance for many years, we called him Kodesh. But at some point between the 2nd year of his rule and the 6th year of his rule, and later, the moment he, so to say, soured, so the Yidden decided from now on, we will only count his Rosh Hashana l'malachim like for any other melech mimalchi umas ha'olam from the month of Tishrei, which is Taike. He completed the building in his 6th year, but Tishrei is when the year changes. So it took 7 months until you went into the 7th year. Ezra got there of. There was only one Tishrei, that's why we only went from the 6th year to the 7th year. I think we should stop over here. We still have until the middle or towards the end of Daf Daled Amud Aleph a lot more of history of what happened in those times. We're going to clarify the meaning of the word Shegal, and Rab Chizda will stand. So Echad B'Tishrei is Rosh Hashana l'malachim Dafke l'malchei Yisrael. God willing, to be continued.